Hi, everyone. It's about 1:01 Central Time. We'll go ahead and get started, and people can join us as they log in. Thanks for joining us today to learn more about accessible course materials and the way that different campus stakeholders can have an impact on accessibility in higher education. I'm Erin Lucas. I'm the Director of Digital Accessibility and User Experience, and I'll be leading today's discussion. So first, why don't we do a bit of housekeeping. Again, thank you for joining us to celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And we did want to give a shout out to the organizers of globalaccessibilityday.org for graciously including us in their list of public events and promoting us on social media. We really appreciate the support. We do encourage questions via the questions tab in the GoToMeeting dashboard, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the session. Anything we don't get to, we will answer and send out to the group. The webinar is not live captioned, but a captioned version will be available post-webinar. We will definitely send that out to the entire group. And then if you have an immediate need or questions, additional questions following the webinar, definitely email me directly at erin@redshelf.com. So let's do a few introductions before we get started. So who is Red Shelf? Well, Red Shelf is an ed tech company making education more affordable, more effective, and more accessible by providing digital course materials and an end-to-end content delivery system to distribute those materials. We partner directly with nearly 700 higher ed institutions and are the primary digital provider to Follett managed stores across an additional 1,200 campuses. If you're a current partner, it's nice to see you. If you're new to Red Shelf, welcome, and we're happy that you joined us. Again, I'm Erin Lucas. I'm the Director of Digital Accessibility and User Experience. I provide direction and support to our amazing Red Shelf team for all things accessibility. In addition, I'm often out on campuses with our sales teams, meeting accessibility folks, bookstore managers, sometimes faculty, talking with them about how we can help ensure all students have what they need to succeed. I've been at Red Shelf since 2017. Prior to that, I had 20 plus years in software design and development, mostly in the federal space. In fact, the last 15 of those 20 years before Red Shelf, I spent at the Department of Defense, ensuring Section 508 compliance. I'm also a DHS certified trusted tester and IAAP member. And before we move into the meat of the presentation, I would be remiss if I didn't give special recognition to our marketing communications manager, who you heard at the beginning, Ashley, for not only moderating today's webinar, but for being the queen of all things grammar and helping turn my giant Accessibility Day webinar brain dump into clear and concise slides. Thanks, Ashley. I couldn't have done this without you. So what are the goals today? What do we really want you to learn in today's webinar? Well, we want you to gain a deeper understanding of the importance of accessibility in higher ed. What are the risks in the current accessibility climate? Why accessibility and usability really go hand in hand. They're really the same thing, essentially. When only half of the students with accessibility needs typically register with disability services, how do we ensure that your digital course materials are accessible to everyone? Especially that 50% that doesn't register. We also want to identify the different types of digital course materials and how they impact accessibility. If you're a bookstore manager, an accessibility office, a professor, or a publisher rep, can you ensure the adoption of the most accessible materials, and how can you do that? And then you can also learn about how Red Shelf is setting a new standard for campus accessibility support, and we will review your options for support avenues through Red Shelf when needed. So let's start with the importance of accessibility in higher education. It's not just a nice to have. It's not just nice to be accessible. Both higher education institutions and their vendors must adhere to government disability regulations. That regulation is the Americans with Disabilities Act, commonly referred to as the ADA, and I'm sure most of you have heard of those regulations. But there are two specific sections within the ADA that we need to pay close attention to. The first one is Section 504, which requires the needs of students with disabilities be met as adequately as those students who are not disabled. And then Section 508 addresses the technology and website content and how these need to be accessible. And there are certain parts of both of these sections that address the rules for organizations that receive federal funds, and not being compliant could put you at risk to lose those funds. And lawsuits are a real threat. It is a legal requirement to be accessible. And since 71% of web users with an accessibility will just abandon an inaccessible website or technology, and 85% of websites have some kind of accessibility barrier, lawsuits are becoming more and more common. So in 2017, there were 814 accessibility lawsuits, across all industries. In 2018, we saw a 181% increase in accessibility lawsuits. And in 2019, experts are predicting we're going to have 3,000 plus accessibility lawsuits across, again, the entire industry. Some of the things that I've read have said they could potentially triple in 2019. But so far in 2019 and Q1, we've had a 31% increase. So if we maintain that pace, it would be around 3,000. So it's more important than ever that you make sure that you, are paying attention to accessibility so you don't put yourself at risk for a lawsuit. And so, we know that many schools are having to go through, accessibility lawsuits. A portion of those lawsuits on the previous slide are higher ed institutions. These are just a few on that really very long list that are currently involved in accessibility lawsuits. And this trend is expected to continue, especially because now higher courts are reversing lower courts' decisions on many of these lawsuits. And it allows these cases to move forward last year and this year, where maybe a few years ago, they would have been stopped at that lower court. This is especially true in California. And in last year's Global Accessibility webinar, we talked about making sure your campus has an "it takes a village" approach to accessibility, and at least knowing who you can direct an accessibility question to should you get one, is really a best practice. Because you might simply say, I don't know, or I can't help you, and you might think that's sufficient, but you could be opening your organization up to a deeper dive into your approach for accessibility. So really, it's about improving the experience for all users. Like I mentioned before, only 50% of students who really can benefit from accommodations will register with disability services. And this is a completely different experience between, K through 12 to higher ed, because in K through 12, their parents were probably, responsible for doing all of that reporting and make sure they got help. But once they get to college, they're responsible for requesting the services they need. Accommodations are not just provided by default, and you must self-identify. So self-advocacy is critical to success in higher education. Accessibility needs are not always obvious. So again, making sure that you're covering all your bases, both 50% of that 100%. And then, you have the whole digital generation. They've always been digital. They've always been online. Generation Zers have different learning experiences, different learning expectations. And so they, expect certain things to be available to them when they learn. So they also could be eligible for accommodations. So how does this fit into the whole adopting accessible course materials? And what do we really say? What do we really mean when we say adopting the most accessible course materials? Well, in simple terms, it's a combination of three things. First is digital content in an accessible format. Next is being able to influence those adoptions of accessible formats. And then combining that with the accessible delivery of an accessible format. So let's start with digital content. So obviously the cornerstone of what we do at Red Shelf is our e-reader. And we ingest both types of formats, PDF and EPUB. This is similar for most reading systems. But which one is better and why? So obviously PDFs are very well known. They've been around since the 90s. They're very easy to create. It's an exact digital replica of a hard copy textbook, or even a design like in marketing, if you have a flyer or something like that, it's designed to be an exact digital replica. It was also developed as a solution for consistent printability, and again, generally easy to create and edit. PDFs are becoming a less popular option for digital materials, however. There's less and less need for printing. They're not adaptable to smaller screens and various resolutions. And the accessibility of a PDF, while you can make a PDF accessible, it's not baked in, it's not automatic, and it can take significant remediation to make accessible. So then what about Epubs? Well, Epubs are born accessible. They are digital content using the same technologies that built the web, that built any web page that you can navigate to. It's essentially the same concept. It was specifically developed, however, for the digital publishing industry. Basically, Epub is short for e-publication. It's compatible with assistive technologies like screen readers, text-to-speech, read-aloud tools, things like that. You can include metadata in an Epub that can be exposed to assistive technology users that help them understand whether or not the content they're trying to use will be accessible to them. It's reflowable, it's easy to use on any size screen, it's not locked into a particular size, format, or orientation. It's governed by industry standards to ensure equal reading experiences for all, and it is becoming the most popular option for course materials. So let's take a look at our catalog, our platform. What do we offer? Let's talk a little bit about what's available with regards to PDFs versus Epub. So there are 1 million titles available on RedShelf. 38% of those titles are PDF, and 62% of those titles are Epub. So clearly, there's more Epubs available than PDFs. But when you look at the distribution of this content across student accounts, what we can see is, well, there's more Epubs available, but only 22% of those files that students are using are Epub, and 78% are PDF. So what conclusions could we potentially draw from this? Is it that the most popular textbooks are not available yet as Epub? Are only the newer editions available, but they're not being adopted? Maybe professors are using the older editions. Are faculty course packs becoming more and more popular? Those are typically PDFs and not Epubs. Are pub reps not encouraging the adoption of Epubs? Do they not even know that Epubs are available? Do bookstore managers know that there's 2 different types of course material options? And if they knew Epub was better for their students, would they encourage the adoption of those materials? Is an accessibility office maybe not aware that their school has an inclusive access program, and so they offer digital textbooks? And if they knew that, would they be influencing the adoption of the more accessible file format? Of course, we don't really know the reason, but we can raise the awareness and we can help make the distribution of Epubs more commonplace, and making sure that we know that this needs to switch. We need to have 78% Epubs and 22% PDFs. So in the RedShelf catalog, how do you identify whether a book that you might be interested in is an Epub? So currently, the way that we display this in our product pages is indicating whether or not text-to-speech is available in the book. So on the product page, you have an ebook feature section that gives you icons and information about the features of the book, and there's specifically a text-to-speech option there. So that means this book is an Epub. So if you didn't see that option, then the source file for the book is a PDF, would not have text-to-speech. Depending on the accessibility of the PDF that was provided, you might have some other barriers for assistive technologies as well. So the other thing that I had mentioned previously about Epubs is you can include metadata in Epubs. The publishers can include that, they send that to us, we can ingest it and use it in various ways. One of the ways is displaying this metadata in the book details. So when it's used effectively, it can let users know whether or not the digital materials will meet their needs. But raw metadata tags are not very user-friendly. So, here's a few examples of metadata tags, accessibility metadata tags: structural navigation, textual visual, unlocked, display transformability, high contrast display. Maybe the geeks among us might know what some of those things could mean with relation to course materials. Accessibility offices might have kind of an idea what that could be, referring to. But if we took all of these tags and we just dumped them onto a page and said, hey, here's your accessibility metadata, you might not really understand what that means. And you might not understand how that correlates to what will help your students. And so it's not really very helpful. So instead of just doing that, we joined a committee that was formed by Benetech and the DAISY Consortium that also includes publishers, accessibility offices, and vendors like ourselves to create a UX guide for displaying accessibility metadata, trying to make it useful, helpful for students and campus personnel. So this guide separates the metadata into the following usable, understandable categories. So is it screen reader friendly? Does it have an accessibility summary? Does it have Epub accessibility conformance? What level of the web content accessibility guidelines does it adhere to? Is the publisher's workflow when creating the Epub from beginning to end, is that workflow certified? If so, who certified it? And each certifier has their own individual icon or logo. And then what are the hazards that you might encounter in this Epub? Is maybe the MathML not quite perfect, and so therefore they've provided more descriptions for the math, things like that. And you can, if you're really a geek about metadata, there's also a comprehensive list of all the accessibility metadata tags. So you could really dig into it and see everything that's in there. But these are the most helpful categories determined by that committee to display on a page about accessibility metadata. So let's take a look at the potential for this in Red Shelf and what this is going to look like when we start adding this to our product pages. So we're going to start creating a specific tab for accessibility metadata. This particular title is a Macmillan title. It's the same title that we looked at before that also has that text-to-speech compatibility. But now you can see, instead of just displaying all the tags associated with this book, we can see that, yes, it's screen reader friendly. It has long descriptions. It also gives some information about enabling specific things within your assistive technology so that the content is more useful and better understood. It does have that WCAG AA accessibility conformance. It's certified by Benetech, and then this is, of course, their icon, their credential. It has no hazards, and then again, you can see all of the accessibility metadata. So you can see how displaying it in this fashion is more helpful and user-friendly, again, than just putting them all on one page and letting you kind of figure out what all that stuff means. So how do we influence accessible adoptions? And at what point can we ask the question, is an Epub available? So there are a number of stakeholders involved with the adoption process. So we have publisher representatives, professors and faculty, bookstore managers, and even accessibility offices can play a role here. So let's start with pub reps. So as a pub rep, are you aware of your publisher's commitment to accessibility? The publishing industry has really embraced Epubs. The big publishers are taking a digital first approach to publishing. 80% of new higher ed textbooks are now in Epub. Older publications or older editions are slowly being moved to Epub format where applicable. And do you receive questions from faculty or bookstores about digital content format? And if you receive those questions, would you know how to answer them? So, publishers are starting to educate their reps on whether or not an EPUB is available and whether they should be promoting the EPUB over the PDF as part of their commitment to accessibility. So how about professors and faculty? Are they adopting new materials next term? So they should be asking their pub reps, is an EPUB version of this book available? The one thing that professors have to keep in mind is students can sometimes fail or drop a class if their course materials aren't accessible. And if there's not an accessible version and they need an accommodation, it can take several weeks to acquire the materials that they need to succeed. So it's important for them to be asking these questions. Are they using the same textbook as last term? Ask if the edition you're using is an EPUB. Am I already using an EPUB and I just don't know it? And if it's only available in a newer edition and you kind of want to check it out and see what the differences are, the publisher should be able to do that, but you could also ask for a sample and check it out for yourself. We can sample to you as well on RedShelf. How early are you posting your materials list? Again, back to that, sharing your list as early as possible, because if there is a need for some sort of accommodation, even sometimes EPUBs require a certain level of accommodations, and it can take several weeks to acquire those materials. Are you using your own course pack? Well, consider conversion to EPUB instead of PDF. There are many easy to use tools to create EPUBs like Libre, and even Google Docs will create a fairly decent EPUB. And then at CSUN, the CSUN Accessibility Conference this past March, the DAISY Consortium did finally announce their proof of concept of the Word to EPUB beta project with Microsoft. So it really looks like fairly soon it'll be an easy conversion, just as easy as creating a PDF to go from Word to EPUB. And then you can take that file and put it on the RedShelf platform and it'll be accessible for your students. Bookstore managers. So maybe you're unsure about how to address accessibility concerns of students with admin and faculty. Maybe reach across that aisle, like we said last year, it takes a village. Ask your accessibility office to work with you and faculty to adopt accessible materials. If you can include accessibility language in your communication to faculty, about their course materials and the deadlines around adoptions, that could be effective. Are you working with pub reps on future term adoptions? Make sure, again, you're asking them, do you offer EPUB format? And then if you're planning an upcoming meeting with RedShelf, ask the accessibility staff to join and we can help connect that dot. So a lot of times when I'm out with the sales team, they're making sure that the accessibility staff is either invited or we have an additional meeting with them so that we can just, kind of put that all into one package for them. And accessibility services offices. So do you want to have influence on the adoption of accessible materials? Does your campus have an administrative level mandate for accessibility? Well, then see if you can get them to include accessible material adoption as a requirement as part of that mandate. If you know your bookstore is offering digital textbooks, maybe you don't know that. Find out if they are. Ask if accessibility was considered during the adoption process. Are you curious about how other campuses are increasing awareness? There are many, many schools now that host their own low-cost, high-impact accessibility conferences, and it's just an absolute wealth of information on how other campuses are being successful in doing, campus-wide accessibility programs. One really great one is the Michigan State University's Accessibility Conference, which we sponsored last year, and their program is amazing. If you ever have a chance to go to that conference, I highly recommend it. And then, do you have an accommodation request? Well, then we encourage you to reach out early for help. Reach out to us and we can assist you with those requests. We offer a unique to the industry support plan for accommodations. We'll get into a little bit more about that in a moment, but first, delivering the accessible course materials. Okay, so you've managed to be successful in adopting nothing but EPUBs for this term. So how are you going to deliver those materials? Well, With RedShelf, of course. Our content delivery system is built around our e-reader. And our e-reader platform has been vetted by industry partners for accessibility. The DAISY Consortium has a group of folks at epubtest.org who have their own test suite that they use to do nothing but rate reading systems for accessibility. And so we have done that with DAISY and the Epub test folks to rate our e-reader for accessibility conformance. InclusivePublishing.org recently named RedShelf as a top reading system for accessibility. National Federation for the Blind not only vetted our reading system for accessibility, they also reviewed our internal processes, like our employee handbook and our accessibility onboarding program for all of our employees. Tech for All works with us to create third-party VPATs and accessibility conformance reports. And third-party VPATs are required by California schools for their vendors who are providing them technology solutions. So it's good for California, so basically good for everyone. We also believe in transparency around what we're doing with accessibility in our products. And so our VPAT includes a list of anything that we consider if it currently supports with exceptions and we want to move that to full support to be even more compliant, then we list that information. It's linked to our VPAT. It's on our website. It's very transparent. Transparency is very important with us as an accessibility first organization. And then, of course, we worked with both DAISY and Benetech on those UX guidelines for metadata. But we understand accommodations might still be a thing. You know, it does happen. Not all students learn the same way. You know, when a digital technology is required in a classroom environment, the ADA actually prohibits the denial of accommodations. So, you know, we trust that disability services know what their students need. What works for one may not work for all. Students have diverse learning styles and preferences. They may be comfortable with one specific assistive technology. And while RedShelf works with Kurzweil's Read the Web, maybe the student would prefer to actually use the desktop version of Kurzweil. And so in that case, they would need to ingest the file separately from our reader. Many individuals need more than one format. You know, we are seeing a rise of folks who really, you know, they like the digital book and they want to use it and they like all the features in it, but they also need to follow along in a print version. You know, it's just a different way of learning. And we do understand that disability services knows their students and knows when they need accommodations. So we're here to support that. You know, we do really, again, pride ourselves in our unique end-to-end accessibility support. And so definitely reach out directly to our accessibility team if you have any questions or requests for specific titles. If we can't offer you our PDF, we do have agreements with many of our publishers that allow us to send you that in a small window of time versus waiting, you know, 2 weeks for a file. If we can help you get it, or if we can't get it to you, we will help you get it. We offer support. We always follow up to make sure that you got what you need in a timely fashion. So if you're offering inclusive access, we also want to make sure that those students have the same first day access. So again, anytime you know that a student's going to need an accommodation or you have questions about even the format that it's in, will an EPUB work for me? Is it still a PDF edition? If you need to sample that book to see if it'll work for you, then we can help you with that. Now, sometimes students do come directly to us, and we do have a Zendesk queue dedicated to accessibility requests, but we will always loop you into those discussions. We always make sure that the student is verified, is working with someone on campus for their accommodations, and then we also would never send a PDF directly to a student. We only send those to accessibility offices. You know, that's a publisher rule, but we just want to make sure that everyone is in the loop with regards to accommodations, so you know, nobody has any questions about, you know, where did the file come from. We all just, you know, have to work together within those constraints. So what's the path forward to accessibility? now that we understand that, there are more accessible course materials available, and we could have an impact on whether or not, those get adopted and how those are delivered to us, what are we doing moving forward with accessibility? So on the horizon for us, on our product roadmap, is just advancing the use of our accessibility metadata. Once we get it into our product pages and we're exposing it, on a product by product basis, we can also share that across our content delivery system. There could be a need for it in, our Adopt tool or in our IA dashboard. And so that way, all of these stakeholders that we're talking about, would be able to see all of this information no matter where they are at any point within the content delivery system. We're also planning additional support in the e-reader for various learning disabilities and dyslexia. So things like background and foreground color changes, font control, being able to change the font that you see within the reader, turning off highlights and underlining. A good example of this is, maybe a student likes to make highlights, of course, in the reader, but maybe when they go back and read, it's harder for them to absorb the content if they only see all the highlights on the page. They want to be able to turn those highlights off. Or for text-to-speech, for instance, it'll highlight a section and then underline the words as it reads. Maybe a student has a preference to do one or the other and not both. So it's really just a matter of making this a more personalized experience for the student. Also, adjusting the line lengths and widths is something else that we're looking into. And then we've talked about the idea of automatic courseware conversion to Epub. So if a professor has a course pack and they want to upload that into the reader, we're looking at how can we include that conversion process in our workflow to get that into the reader and make it more accessible for the student. And again, at Red Shelf, we really do take an accessibility first approach to everything. We don't see it as just a feature that we offer. We see it as a requirement, as a basic human right. We continue to foster discussions about accessibility and, like we're doing today, adopting accessible content. We're face-to-face with campus personnel, answering questions and offering support. We also asked Disability Services to help us beta test new accessibility features in the reader. Your feedback only makes our products better. We did that with our text-to-speech tool, and it was very, very successful. We just have an involvement in the accessibility community as a whole. We contribute to committees and working groups. We attend and sponsor and present at accessibility and higher education conferences. And we're proud to host the Chicago Accessibility Meetup Group in our office. So that pretty much wraps up the guts of our presentation, if you will. If you have questions, hopefully you've submitted them in the dashboard for Ashley to send to me. So I'm going to take a look at that now. Oh, that's a good question. So the one question that we do have, if a publisher wants to offer both an EPUB and a PDF format for the same title, do they have to have distinct ISBNs for each format type? I think the answer to that is true, but that's more of a publishing team question. But we will definitely get the answer to that question and send that out to you. Okay, all right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, if you have any comments or questions, or if you would like to request a demo or talk over our accommodation process, please just reach out to me directly, Erin@redshelf.com, and I'd be more than happy to assist you and have a chat. Thanks everyone. Have a super Global Accessibility Awareness Day and a fabulous weekend.